And it takes a long time to get there, right? So prototype while you've got another game going on, you know, and don't commit to ever needing to follow up those prototypes unless you're compelled to. All right. Wow, I'm actually almost on schedule. No, maybe not. Okay, so I said at the beginning of this talk that it was going to be how and why, and most of the time I spent saying a whole bunch of how. I think there was a lot of why implicit in what I was saying. Like, why did I pick exactly these prototypes? Well, I had some deep core motivations behind those choices I made. So now I'm going to delve into those, because I think this is the key to how we pick what projects we're going to work on, and how we pick like what our careers are like as artists. I hate that word career, but like what our trajectory is going to be through the spaces that we're exploring. Now, why is a delicate subject, right? I can't tell you why you should design games, because it's like your art. Like, your reasons are what makes it yours. What I can do is I can give you some examples of things that I'm exploring that I find compelling, and maybe you'll say, oh yeah, that's kind of interesting, or maybe it'll remind you of something, or maybe you'll think it's stupid, right? At the very least, I want to put further out there the idea that this is a subject that indie gamers should be talking about, at least as much as the how. All right, so this is, from a very personal point of view, why I made these prototypes and Braid, and why I'm still making games now. Throughout my life, I've, ever since I was a kid, I've been concerned with the discovery of deep truths. Like, I didn't want to care about like superficial things in life. I wanted to know, like, hey, I was like 8 and I wanted to know the meaning of life, right? And that never went away. And one thing that compels me about games as opposed to other media is that they're built on systems, right? Whether it's like a simulation, like a physics simulation, or maybe a more formal like rule system with interacting, if A then B. Systems have this bias where they inherently describe truth, provided that you give them axioms that are true, right? They start with a set of axioms or a set of code or whatever, and they just plow forward and say, here's the result of that, here's the result of that, here's the result of that. And the only way that you get something that's not true is if you have some really bad bugs or you intentionally distort or bias them. This is unlike every other form of art, right? If you're writing literature, like you want to write the great American novel or something, and you want to say something really true about human nature, the form of the book isn't going to help you do that. You can put any words down that you want, right? You can put true stuff down, you can put like totally false bullshit down, right? And it's all equally valid in that novel form. With systems, it's not like that. That's kind of exciting. How far can that go? Can that ever say anything really deep? Or are we just talking about truths that are kind of more trivial? I don't know, but that's something I want to explore. And Braid sort of got me hooked on that. Oracle Billiards, too. If we can set up a system that's kind of like the real world in certain ways, and then make things possible in that system that we'd like to be able to experience in this reality but can't quite, maybe if we do that enough, we can learn something about this reality that we're in. So one thing I was trying to do in Braid was model enlightenment. Like, oh, I'm stuck in the bottom of this pit and there's no way out. And like, what, it's not like a normal puzzle game where I have to do some sequence of 17 different moves to like flip switches in all the right order and stuff. It's like I do one simple thing and I'm out of the pit, and it's like, oh, I understand now, right? That is something I really would love to feel more of in this life here, and I want to explore that through game design, right? I'm going to skip this one because it's too hard to explain. I feel that games are important to the future of humanity in the same way. That sounds like a grand statement, but it's obviously true for other forms of art that we're very familiar with, right? So film and novels have drastically shaped our very society that we live in, and without them, our lives would be very different, right? And other kinds of things too, like, technical books or, nonfiction, right? We all learned out of that kind of books. Our conceptions of humanity sort of come from fiction. The way we visualize things in our head is heavily informed by the language of film. Now, I don't think games are there yet, but I think that if we're good about it, we can develop games into a medium that's more relevant to the wide swath of humanity, in the same way that film and novels are. And I think that means that we also have to be careful. Because if that's true, if games are able to speak to human nature in the same way, then in the future a lot of people will be playing them. And if a lot of people will be playing them, and as I believe all games teach something, then a lot of people are going to be learning what games are teaching. And I have this great trepidation that games right now teach a lot of the wrong things. And before I start going into that, I'm going to refer you to two books that have very different viewpoints on this, but that will back up this idea of like all games teach, right? On the left is Ralph Koster's Theory of Fun for Game Design, and on the right is a book that just came out, Ian Bogost's Persuasive Games. And the reason that I say that all games teach something is that for the most part, well, usually it's really obvious, because they're modeled on giving the player rewards for performing certain kinds of behavior, right? So the game is encouraging some kinds of behavior and discouraging other kinds. That's almost the definition of a game, according to most people. One big problem that I have these days is that that kind of reward system is very easily turned into this sort of Pavlovian or Skinnerian scheme that a lot of people talk about, you know, if you go to mainstream game developer conferences. It's considered like a best practice. Schedule rewards for your players so that they don't get bored and give up on your game. I think that's actually exploitation, and it really bothers me, right? I would rather give a player core gameplay that interests them rather than stringing them along with little pieces of candy so that they'll suffer through the terrible gameplay, but keep playing because they gain levels or new items and stuff, right? So I have a really hard time convincing people of this next point, but I think a lot of modern game design is actually unethical, especially massively multiplayer games like World of Warcraft, because they're predicated on this kind of player exploitation in which, you know, humans have this natural instinct to not do things that are boring or that don't benefit them or that are stagnant, but we override that by like plugging into their pleasure centers and giving them scheduled rewards, and we convince them to pay us money and waste their lives in front of our game, you know, in this exploitative fashion. So I don't think that's very good, as an understatement. And I don't see much of a difference looking at these three pictures between the cigarette thing, the junk food thing, and World of Warcraft. They all look the same to me, except they're operating in different planes. The thing about games is it sort of seems like, oh, there's no victim of World of Warcraft. Like somebody just wants to play that, right? And we're giving them what they want to play. That's what cigarette people say too, actually. Because there's an illusion of no victim, it makes games, certain kinds of games, seem unthreatening. But I think if you fast forward into a future society where like all kids were weaned on World of Warcraft, man, what did they learn from that? And was it a very good thing? So the question I have is, like, as an industry, and I'm speaking of the whole industry, like indies and mainstream together, right? Are we propagating the intellectual and emotional version of this picture right here, right? What kind of future are we building? How conscious are we being of that, right? This is a very important question to ask ourselves, and very few people will even broach it. Other things that I aim for, on a more personal level as opposed to like a global level, authenticity and connection, right? We all know, or hopefully we know, that games are inherently poor at certain kinds of human factors, like believable characters, that are a huge disadvantage compared to novels that way, because we need like AI to respond to the player, and AI just doesn't work, and we don't know how to make it work. But games actually have an advantage over linear media when it comes to the author communicating, or maybe even communing with the audience, right? Because they can provide more of a conversation, because you're able to anticipate maybe things that the player will do and provide reactions. And through those reactions, you can tell the player, hey, I've thought about you. You know, I've thought about the sorts of things you might do, and I've provided, you know, I care about what you're going to do in this realm that I set up, right? So games can be personal and express care. And that sounds like a sort of weird hippie kind of thing to say, but I think it already happens. Like, remember what I said earlier about leaps of faith, right? It's bad if you let the player like lose faith in your level design early. That's actually an example of care or carelessness, but we don't frame it that way, right? If a player feels like they're in good hands in terms of a game design, they'll forgive all sorts of lack of production values and crazy things. So, you know, my personal commitment in my next couple of games is to be extremely personal and authentic and vulnerable. I want to be so personal, and this is a weird thing, like people don't talk about, like, I'm going to express myself authentically somehow through this game. But that's what I want. I want to be so vulnerable to my audience that my normal social anxieties kick in, and I'll be like, wow, if they play this game, are they going to think I'm creepy? Are they going to think I'm like emotionally weak? Or just what are people going to think? Like, if I can inspire that kind of reaction in myself, I know I'm going in the right direction in terms of